computer? The answer is yes. Thank you. It wouldn't have been, and so I'll make a note that we can post this recording on the NavajoThaw.com website. Other questions or comments? Okay, so we'll move on. So what I wanted to do here next is just to simply provide an overview of what we're going to do today, what we're going to do next Monday, and what we're going to do 2 Mondays from now. I've given you a high-level overview. So today is basically grant writing basics. Who's eligible? How do you have capacity to go after a grant? How do you conduct some research? So in session 1, it says participants will learn the basics of grant writing, organizational development and eligibility, funding, researching funding sources, hearing presentations on immediately available opportunities through USDA Rural Development. Basics of organizational eligibility and readiness will be addressed to ensure that completed applications benefiting the region can be submitted by as early as March 27. Technically, there's actually one grant program due even before then, somewhere around the 15th of March. I'm not sure if we'll go after that one or not, but I'll talk about that in a second. So we're getting underway at 1 o'clock here, and from 1 to 1:15, what are we? We're at 1:27 now. Overall purpose, and allow people to get situated, and then to talk about the overall purpose of the Navajo Thaw and how the BANE project fits in. So we're pretty much on schedule here. I've already covered these 4 purposes here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're ahead of the game a little bit there. And then mainly what I'm going to do is to jump into grant writing fundamentals. And then we'll do a recap and then wrap up, hopefully around 3:30. If it runs a little late, runs a little early, that's fine either way, depending on how much conversation we need to have here. So that's today. Most of it's going to be this PowerPoint on grant writing fundamentals. Session 2, this is where we start to move more into the real world opportunity, where we have existing eligible applicants reviewing a set of potential project ideas. I've got 11 ideas. It's insane how many things I think we could do. I'll share some of those, but it may be other people say, hey, I've got a better idea. And the idea would be next Monday, we might pick 2, 3, 4, 5 projects and go after grants, leading to the assignment of projects to applicants. So kind of connecting funding source and applicant and project, that kind of a triad there. We'll figure all that out next Monday, or at least get started on it anyway. In the second part of the session, I'll provide some of the primary research and messaging. I like to believe, it may not be true, but I'd like to believe that just about everything we go after in the name of helping the Navajo people and help in the name of the Navajo Thaw will be successful. There is such a compelling need. There's a lot of compelling statistics. So we'll talk about some of that and just kind of get everybody oriented on how you make your case. And then those new to the grant writing world will learn how organizations and projects move from a concept to a competitive proposal. So that's next week, next Monday, March 1st. And then there's the agenda, basically talking about summary of the project purpose. Kind of we'll summarize what we did today, and then we'll talk about who the applicants are, who the grant, what the grants are, what the projects might be, just kind of all an introduction, and start to kind of create a melting pot of good ideas and projects and applicants. We'll talk a little bit about applicant eligibility, making sure that we can actually connect. I mean, for example, it's very rare that a for-profit business can get a grant. But right now, today, in this era of COVID, there's actually exceptions to that. And there were exceptions before that. But we'll talk about the eligibility. And then we'll spend some time aligning the applicants and the projects and funding sources next Monday. And as I already mentioned, talk about Navajo Thaw proposal messaging, next steps. And then maybe toward the end of it, if we've got people that are saying, hey, I want to learn more about this, we'll connect you to a grant writer that's actually working on something, and you guys can work on it together, which would be very cool. And then finally, on the third day, March 8th, we'll bring everybody together again, the applicants and the proposals, for a work session. So at this point, it's like, okay, we got kind of the basics of grant writing. We sort of know who each other are. How are we going to meet this deadline there? How do we meet the March 27 and March 31 deadlines for these particular programs? And there's the agenda for the third day. Review of project purpose and accomplishments, so just kind of catching up. Status report on all the grants. Have we started them? Are we running into any trouble? Can we troubleshoot that? We'll ask about the grant writers. What are their perspectives? I've got this idea that there may be 3 or 4 or 5 people that haven't written a grant before, but they just like this, and who knows? Maybe we create a little Navajo Thaw consortium of grant writers. I don't know where all this goes, but I know that a lot of good things are going to happen in the next couple of sessions here. So that's the next 3 days. Comments, questions at this point? All right. Well, I call this next slide, So You Want to Be a Grant Writer. And the first thing on the slide is the mystique of grant writing. I just my personal comment on this is that, so I've been in the field of economic development since 1987. So 33 years, more than that. And my very first job I live in Eastern Oregon, and my very first job was this community that I still live in today was really struggling. We had the highest unemployment rate in the state, which was about half of Navajo's unemployment rate, but it was still really high. We had some of the lowest per capita income, which is still higher than Navajo's average income or per capita income, but things were tough. And we were a little mill town. So back in the late 1980s, they were closing all the national forests. The timber harvest was being shut down. The mills were being closed. And for the first time ever, this community decided, you know what, we have to do something here. We have to figure out how to have an economy when we can't just assume that the sawmill is going to be open forever, or that cattle prices are going to be decent forever. So I come from a very typical rural community that hit the wall. Everything was really bad. And the community at the time was reacting to a new governor and a new state posture about providing lottery grant money to rural communities to change their economy. And that's how I got started in this field of economic development. And they looked at me and they said, well, do you know how to write a grant? And I said, well, I've never done it before. And so it was just a matter of figuring out how to put something like that together. And my personal experience in this town, my first job, I was on it for 6.5 years. And the town just clicked. It was like we hit bottom. We all know that a pastime of everybody is to beat up on everybody, and we're doing that more than we should. I think we're doing that more than we used to. But in this time, for 6.5 years, I never heard anybody beat up on anybody. All I heard was, we're concerned about jobs, we're concerned about incomes. How can we create a place where our kids, after maybe they go to college or maybe they don't go to college, have a job here? And everybody just worked well together. And then we had this big idea. And the big idea is that this little town in Eastern Oregon happened to be on the Oregon Trail. And so we all started talking about, well, what could our little town be? And we thought, well, we could be the place on the Oregon Trail where everybody in the United States and everybody in the world would come to learn about what the Oregon Trail was, how people would go from Missouri to Western Oregon, and they would come through our valley. And then the key was, in order to get that project going in a town that was broke, was how can we get grant funding? So that's my little story on how I became a grant writer, was that I have decent writing skills. I have decent skills at listening and trying to figure out what people need to hear and what the context of things needs to be. But it was just a matter of kind of learning as you go, but learning in a community that really worked well together. And that's a whole nother topic about how people work well together. I think that's as important as grant writing skills. I'm going to set all that aside. But this first item on this slide, I call it the mystique of grant writing. And that's because when I introduce myself, sometimes I'll introduce myself as I'm a strategic planner. People look at me and they squint and I go, well, I don't know what that is. That sounds boring. Or I'll say I'm in economic development. And they'll kind of think, well, that sounds maybe like jobs, and I'm not so sure what that is, but that's okay. But if I introduce myself for some reason as a grant writer, my experience has been that people think I'm some kind of genius. I'm no smarter than I am as an economic developer or anything else, but there is a mystique to grant writing. There is a notion that you've really got to know something in this world to be a successful grant writer. And to me, there's no mystique about it. It is a skill set, just like, being an accountant or being an attorney or being a chapter manager or, even taking care of the chapter grounds. But there is something about this notion of grant writing that causes people to think, wow, that's really special. That's really unique. So I think one of the things I'm hoping to do over these sessions is to really kind of remove all of the mystery around grant writing and just kind of get down to the basics of what it is. And so the next two items on this slide, and then I'll take a little break here, kind of get at that. So grant writing, just like sales for any business or really any form of human communication, really is first and foremost about understanding your audience. And so who are you writing to? What does the person that you're writing to need to know in order that they'll make the decision you hope they do? So it really is a matter of understanding the audience. And later on, I'll have a couple of slides that gets to understanding your audience, whether they might be a federal agency or a state grant program or a foundation program, or at Navajo, perhaps the Abandoned Mine Lands Grant Program or the ICDBG Grant Program. What is it about your audience that you need to understand? What is it that they need to hear? So that's a big part of it, is just trying to figure that out. And then it's like sales. It is, once you know what they need to hear, you need to tell that to them. And you need to tell it to them in a very persuasive way. It generally needs to be free of errors. You don't have to be the world's best writer. Although if you're not the world's, if you're not an average writer, you're going to probably want to work with a friend or bounce some editing off of somebody because you don't want a lot of errors in it. But you need to make that sales pitch. Once you understand what they need to hear, you need to be the one that basically puts it in that kind of perspective. So with that, I'm going to pause at the end of this slide. I know that I think 3 people have joined us since we took the last break, one of which is Dorothy. And Dorothy, you have managed to write a little red scribbly line on the slide, which is very impressive to me. So you get to introduce yourself, Dorothy. So Dorothy, if you're there, you are on mute.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Dorothy.
Welcome. Yes,
I was not
raise
sure.
your hand.
I was not sure what I was doing. Can you hear? Okay.
Well, we'll let you introduce yourself, Dorothy. I know who you are, but a lot of people don't.
Okay. Do I push my name there or?
Actually, we can hear you loud and clear. So,
Oh, great. Okay. Well, I'm Dorothy Lee. I'm from Ottawa Gap chapter, living at Bitter Springs, and the newly elected chapter president. And I'm trying to figure all this out, the new way of meeting. Thank you.
thank you. And I believe, is it Loretta is your vice president? Is that right? Or is she your secretary treasurer?
Loretta is my secretary treasurer, and our vice president is Lee Yazzie.
Yes. Okay.
He just got elected into vice president. He was the grazing official.
That's awesome. Well, Dorothy, you might be trying to convince some people you don't know what you're doing, but I know your reputation, and I know what Ottawa Gap accomplished a few years ago when you were chapter manager, I think, there. And I know you're highly capable, so you're going to speak up on this here. Yeah.
Okay.
So welcome. And I was going to say, Loretta has volunteered to actually do a kind of a Zoom training. So when she does that, I'm going to take that class because there's a few tricks I should know. But anyway, good to talk to you. Nelson, yes. I think I know Nelson. Welcome, sir. You want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name's Nelson. I'm from Tuba City chapter. And thank you for having this grant writing session. I'm always interested in expanding some knowledge, and I hope the information provided really helps us all. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nelson. I just want to say I really, really appreciate that you're here. Please extend our invitation on behalf of the Navajo Thaw team to your chapter officials. We'd love to be a little more engaged at Tuba City than we are. So that invitation is extended through you, and really glad you're here. So thank you. Now, Arlene Ed, could you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. My name is Arlene Ed. I'm with Shanto Economic Development Corporation. I just logged on. Thanks for having this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Shanto is well represented here, and Coppermind as well. Anybody else that has not had a chance to say hello yet? All right. Okay. Questions or comments so far? All right, I'm moving on. I feel like I'm at the kind of very basics, but that's where we're starting here. So the next topic here, whoops, I don't have my slide on the screen, is, so just what are you trying to accomplish? You know, if you're going after a grant, the main thing is you need to have a problem that you're solving, and you need to be able to define a solution. Almost any grant that you're going to write is going to ask you, what's the problem and what do you think the solution is? What's your methodology? And so the first thing is that typically when you're going after a grant, you're doing it for one of two reasons here. It's either you got sort of an idea, but you're not sure how to carry it out, so you need a plan. Or maybe you've got a plan, but you need to build something. Or maybe you've built something, but you need to operate it. And I'm sure if I thought about it, I could find a fourth or a fifth kind of category. But in general, in the world of trying to get something done with grant money, it's going to fall into one of these three categories. My perspective is that going after a planning grant of the three of those is the easiest there. It's what I've done the most of. I've been around Navajo now for the last 6 years, and aside from community land use plans, which are fine, chapters typically do not have an economic plan or a game plan for projects or a broader game plan to make the overall place a better place. And so there has been a tremendous amount of need for planning and therefore planning grants. And fortunately, there are quite a few federal programs and state programs and others, Navajo programs, that will pay for planning. So there's not really a lot of requirement to go after a planning grant other than you really need to convince the granting entity that this plan is needed and that there's some broader, it's not just, hey, I've got, it's Monday, I've got a good idea. I think we should have a new latte stand at the chapter, and I want a feasibility study on that. For a planning grant like that, typically the funder is going to say, whose idea is this? Is it backed by a chapter resolution? How do we know that there's a majority of people that want to pursue that? But in general, going after a planning grant is fairly simple. They just need to be convinced that it rises to a priority and it's a project that possibly could make sense. As compared to a construction grant, which is a whole new, level of preparedness that you'd have to have. So if you're going after, grant money to build something, repair something, extend infrastructure, repair homes, whatever it may be, especially at Navajo, and we all know this, or most of us know this, the level of requirements, the level of environmental assessments or chapter resolutions or right-of-way or biological clearances or environmental clearances, all of that's important off the reservation. But on the reservation, it's imperative. It's just critical that your construction project is, and the phrase typically is, readiness to proceed, or shovel ready has become the term over the last 10 years. And so, so you've got planning grants and you've got construction grants, and there's plenty of grant programs that can fund either of those there. And then you have operations. And my main point about operations, so let's say that we're using this example of the latte stand adjacent to the chapter house, which I just came up with, maybe not the best example, but for a planning grant, okay, we're thinking that maybe that's possible. We really need to do a feasibility study. Or a construction grant, we've really thought about this. It's a part of our plan. It's a priority. We have a feasibility study. This thing makes sense. How do we build it? But the third part of it is, could we get a grant to operate our business? And the answer typically to that is no. So going after business operations or government operations grants is a real challenge. Somebody's got their phone going. I'll let that, okay, thanks. So, so my main point here, planning grants and construction grants are possible. Construction grants harder than a planning grant because you got to be more prepared and you got to make that broad case. And then the operations side of things is almost impossible. There are some grant programs that do that, but they're very rare. So my thought would be is that if your chapter, your community, the region says, hey, I've got this great thing that's going on and I want grant money basically to keep it going, that's going to be very difficult. So let's just stop just on that part of this slide. Any comments, questions about planning versus construction or operations? Or can you think of a different, activity that's not planning or construction or operations that you might want to think about?
I had a
Brian.
quick question.
All right. I think that might have been Zoe.
Yeah, this is me. Thank you.
All right.
You mentioned feasibility studies. That would go under, is that something you need have done before you apply for the grant, or is that part of the planning process that you can a grant can be applied to?
Yeah, so these federal programs we're talking about, and we could be talking about 50 to 100 programs. I'm really focused for the sake of this immediate opportunity with this one agency, USDA Rural Development. We'll be talking about 4 of their grant programs next Monday. And of those 4, I think all 4 of them, I think feasibility study development could be an eligible expense in any of those. So, but yes, typically if you're going to go after foundation or government money for a construction project, they're going to want to know that if you build it, it's feasible there. And so, yes, that feasibility study could be one of those activities. Follow-on thought or questions, Zoe?
No, I think that answered my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that one of the grants that it's associated with the Navajo Thaw, it's not Dotsil chapter. We applied, I was the grant writer for that chapter. We successfully received a grant to do a feasibility study for tourism businesses in the Bennett Freeze area. And pre-pandemic, our conclusion was, oh boy, there are huge opportunities for tourism at Navajo. And so that feasibility study, it's about a 200-page plan I authored, really demonstrates feasibility. And I think that with the rebounding of the economy, that I think is natural when we open up again, which I'm hoping is this fall, that we'll see those feasibility studies that were done for that industry at Navajo still be relevant. I mean, right now, it's obvious there is no tourism going on at Navajo or hardly anywhere else. A few exceptions, but not much. So anyway, that's the feasibility study. There was another comment or question.
Brian, this is Nelson.
Yes.
So similar to feasibility, is it also pretty much the same when we talk about architect and engineering? Also in construction and planning, or more planning?
So yeah, Nelson, definitely one of the eligible expenses for kind of our world of what we're looking at through this 3-workshop setup. Yeah, we could go after funding for architectural and engineering. Again, they're probably going to say, do you have everything else ready to go? Do you have your chapter resolution approved? Do you have feasibility established? But yeah, if you were looking to go after funding for a project that Tuba City chapter might have in mind, and you needed funding for those types of professional services, architectural engineering, that would be an eligible expense for some of these grant programs. Did I get that, Nelson?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good.
What about saying, as far as an economic plan, you have to relocate people in order to create space. So, what we're looking for, could be looking for, is some type of grant that allows for economic development, but it's some kind of compensation form in there.
Yeah, I think Tuba City's got, Tuba City is an interesting situation because it's the largest chapter on the Navajo Nation from population standpoint. Shiprock is close. And so it is kind of the big city of Navajo, which puts it in a unique position in terms of economic opportunity, just because of your sheer size. Not that it's huge, about 10,000 population or so. You know better than I do on those numbers. But the challenge that Tuba has is the availability of land. Like I think you're getting at there. You got to move people around just to build something because you're somewhat landlocked. And so if the question is, could some of these grant programs go toward identification of land or figuring out how we can make land by moving people? I would think you could make the case that that would be an eligible use of funds. And I could call you afterwards. We could kind of brainstorm a little bit more on how that might happen. But yeah, I think that's a possibility. In fact, I was just on a call yesterday, or must have been last week, with one of the organizations in Tuba that has big expansion plans, and finding land's a challenge. Very good, Nelson. Thank you.
Okay.
Comments? All right. I don't think that I'm hearing a question, so I'm going to go back to the slide. I think it's that one. Okay. So again, we're on the just what are you trying to accomplish? The planning, construction, operations continuum. Now we move on to the capacity to start it and the sustainability to finish it. So a funder, if you're going after a grant, they're really going to ask, do these guys really have the ability to do this? And then if they succeed, can they keep it going? The last thing that a funder wants is basically some relic out there. Either it's the study sitting on the shelf, if it's planning, or if it's construction, the building that's half completed because they really didn't have enough money even with the grant, or the business that actually got started, or the fairgrounds that actually got improved, but something wasn't thought out. And so this is the issue of capacity. This is the issue of convincing the funder that you've really got the ability to get this off the ground. And I've got other slides that relate to capacity, but it really relates to, for example, Tuba City, they're very fortunate that they've got Nelson. They're a big enough chapter that they can have their own planner there. None of the other chapters in the Bennett Freeze region could even come close to having their own planner. So that's a big advantage for Tuba City. That is capacity there that a lot of the other chapters don't have. One of the things, not to get off the point too much, but I think everybody that lives at Navajo knows what a certified chapter is. But some of our grant writers that haven't lived at Navajo may not have heard that phrase. And certification is a very specific term at Navajo that relates to capacity. And there are certain chapters that are certified, and there are certain chapters that are not. So in the Bennett Freeze region, the 9 chapters, 5 of them are not certified, 4 of them are. And certification, which is kind of a professional standard of capacity, exists for Tuba City and for Loop and for Botaway Gap and for Tonalea. And it doesn't for the others. And this was a good move by Navajo to say, if you're going to run a chapter, there's a certain threshold that you need to meet to demonstrate capacity. And so this relates, and actually there's several people on the call that know this better than I do, but it relates to an ability of a chapter to run a meeting, to do budgeting, to do filing, auditing, all of these kind of basics that frankly a lot of people just take for granted. If I'm in a city, they must know how to do all of that. But if you're at Navajo, the average chapter population is 2,500. These are very small population little counties there. And if you're not certified, it is just really challenging to go after grants. And if you are certified, it's still challenging to go after grants, but it's more possible. USDA rural development in general, I don't know, there may be some exceptions to this, but that federal agency will seriously consider a grant to a certified chapter, but they will not to an uncertified chapter. So if Cameron or Tulani Lake, Coal Mine Canyon want to go after a grant, that agency is going to say, well, you're not certified, probably not. And even if you are certified, do you have a current audit? And that's a key thing there. Now, Shanto, I'm forgetting that Shanto is here, but there's several people with Shanto. Shanto is actually not only certified, but if I'm not mistaken, you're one of the AFOG, the alternate form of governance county chapters, which is actually an even higher level of certification. And Tuba City is that as well. So we've got a couple of chapters here that have very high capacity, at least through your credentials, at least through how the Navajo Nation sees you officially. But then there's always the situation that a chapter can be certified, but falls into a lack of ability. And so while you might have the actual certificate, do you really have your books in order? Do you have everything, your staffing in order? Do you have your chapter managers, the chapter manager, trained and all of that? So that's the whole realm of capacity. Time for a story. In 2014, I was just finding my way to the Navajo Nation. And the first chapter that I discovered was the Botaway Gap chapter. And that's where I met Thomas So, who I spoke of earlier. That's where I met their chapter manager, Brian Kensley. And I got to know Tom and Brian, and we looked at each other and we said, you know what, we should do something. They looked at me, do you know how to write grants? Yes. Well, what if we wrote a grant for something? Love to. What do you have going on? So we did a strategic plan for Botaway in 2014, and we updated it through the Navajo Thaw. And in that planning process, I learned about what was then called Antelope Trails Vending Organization, a group of vendors that were very well organized. Now they've changed their name to a Navajo name just so I can't pronounce it well, but I think it's known today as Jahab. Okay, Dorothy, help me out. I thought I could get it out. Jadahabtine Enterprises. Yeah, you can laugh at me for that one. I just knew I was going to get it out, then I didn't. So this vending organization is really impressive. If you're a Navajo and you're along US 89 that runs from Flagstaff to Page, you are, other than when you're in a pandemic, you are on a tourism superhighway there. You're right up against the Grand Canyon. You've got RVs galore, and everybody is coming either north from Flagstaff, south from Page, and they're going to the Grand Canyon. And then along the road there is these vending facilities, which, my first impression was not good. Here I am, this white guy that wants to make a difference at Navajo, and I'm a little bit scared of getting off the highway and going to one of these vending facilities because they're plywood and there's graffiti, and I don't really, is there a bathroom? Can I use my credit card? Is this safe? Can I get off the highway without tipping over? Typical white person stuff. I'm sure most Navajo people go, whatever, but that's the way a tourist thinks there. And so what Tom and Brian and I did is we had this amazing grant application that was submitted in February of 2014. And the grant was submitted to the state of Arizona, and I wrote 2 grants that day. And the other one was written for the city of Globe. So the city of Globe is a little mining town in the middle of Arizona, east of Phoenix, and it's not Native American there. And these 2 grants went in, and I wrote both of them. And that application for Botaway Gap and for the vendors there, in my opinion, was one of the best grants I've ever written in my life. And then the grant that was submitted to Globe, frankly, was one of the worst grants I'd ever written in my life. I didn't have any information, so I just kind of flung a bunch of stuff out there. Guess which grant got funded? Globe. So later on, I called the Arizona Commerce Authority, and I said, I wrote 2 grants. You funded one, you didn't fund the other. One of them was really good, one was really bad, and you funded the bad one. And I want to know why you didn't fund the good one. And they said, well, which one was that? And I said, well, it's the Botaway Gap chapter at Navajo. And what he responded with infuriated me. It was my first experience, I feel like, as a white male, feeling really discriminated against. His response was, well, you know, we don't really believe that if we send the money to a chapter at Navajo that anything will get done. And I was enraged by that. He said, you know, we've had an experience of doing this, and we don't believe that they have the capacity to manage money, nor do we believe that they have the sustainability to actually, if they built something, to keep it going. In fact, we think if we send a check, we'll never have any means to find out where the money went, because that's been our experience in the past. I was pretty upset by that. Since then, I've now made another 70 trips to Navajo, and I can now see how hard it is. It's just really hard to accept money for a grant-funded project and carry it to fruition and operate it. I mean, I'm not taking the other guy's viewpoint totally there. But I can see why there really needs to be a higher level of confidence that that if a chapter or if you know, any Navajo entity receives a grant, that they're really going to carry it through. So that has to do both with the capacity to start a project and then the sustainability to operate it. And the beautiful thing about the vending organization and the track record they established is that I was absolutely convinced that if we got the funding, we could manage it, and that that organization could carry on, and still carrying on, and still successful to this day, notwithstanding the pandemic. So that's
Brian,
yes.
so would you say then the reason why the planning grants tend to get more funded is because writing a plan and writing something that, you know, doing planning or feasibility or whatever, that's kind of more, I don't want to say myopic, and easier to get done and accomplish than having an overall construction or operation project. So that's why those don't get awarded as many grants, because what you were saying right there, the completion, the sustainability piece.
Yeah, you know, I'm going to answer it with a very personal answer. So I've been a consultant now since 2003, and I've written 88 strategic plans from coast to coast in the United States, everywhere from basically Vermont to Oregon, Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota. I've done plans for communities all over the place. And then after I say that, the question that I fear is, so what? What's really happened as a result of all that planning you've done? And that is a hard question for me to answer, because as a consultant, basically consultants are paid for a project, and then we've got to figure out how to keep bread on the table, so we go to the next project. And if we're planners, that's what we do. We bounce all over the place. So if you were to ask me what really happened on those 19 plans you wrote in North Dakota, I have a very embarrassing answer, which is I don't know. I'm on a bit of a tangent, Kristen, but I'm going to use your question to illustrate why we designed the Navajo Thaw the way we did. So I talked to Tom and I talked to Robert Black early in 2019. And I said, I know that we're trying to get something going with the Bennett Freeze. If we do this, this project needs to be a 3-year project. Otherwise, I know what's going to happen. We're going to go in and we're going to get a bunch of plans done. Nothing's going to happen. I'm not really answering your question. I'm kind of using it as a springboard to answer it, or kind of make a different point, which is in the design of the Navajo Thaw. This is a 39-month project, and we're only on month 16 or 17 right now. We're still going to be around for all of 2021 and all of 2022. And under the best case scenario, we will receive and disperse hundreds of millions of dollars in the next 2 years. That is possible. And it still won't be enough compared to the problem. And so I think that the Bennett Freeze, the Navajo, is a kind of a long-term problem with a long-term solution. But Kristen, back to your point, it is why it's easier to fund a planning study because it's an easier threshold, as I said earlier, to kind of make the case for. And then when it's done, you know, if nothing else happens, there's not much penalty for that. But speaking for myself, I'm tired of just writing plans that don't go anywhere. So that's why the Navajo Thaw is designed the way it is. Other comments or questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Brian, so when, say, a grant is funded for construction and it's, I guess if you want to say economic base, then how would you most likely say that the language shows the benefit from the grant? Is it through jobs? Is it through just a business showing up, and the business will have, it'll be reported whatever the business, you know, by its taxation, or how do you report an economic report on economic development?
Wow.
Or is that
Great question. And yep, you nailed the answer, kind of embedded in your question. Your intuition is exactly right. Back in the mid 1990s, I worked for the state of Oregon, not as a grant writer, but as a business development officer. My title was actually similar to what Dolly Lane's title is, Regional Business Development Officer. That was my job. And my job basically was to represent 5 counties and try to work with them to recruit new businesses into Eastern Oregon. And so so I was representing the state, and I had grant money that I could offer to businesses if they would invest in my region. And so that's exactly what happened, is that we would negotiate on it. And so we will give you a $100,000 grant. And interestingly, the term actually is forgivable loan. And it's kind of the same, and it's very different at the same time. We would offer, let's say, a $100,000 forgivable loan. The performance of the company, in order to get the loan forgiven, in other words, turn it into a grant, would be that they would have to do X or Y or Z. And I think you just nailed X, Y, and Z. X would be, you've got to create and maintain 10 jobs for 2 years. And we're going to come and we're going to monitor your performance. Have you created those jobs? Have you maintained those jobs? If you have, we'll forgive the loan. Or perhaps it wouldn't just be the jobs, but it would be, how much are these people making? Because we didn't really want to subsidize a whole bunch of minimum wage jobs. So they would have to have an average, pay of $15 an hour or whatever the number would be. So yes, good question, and you answered it. Sometimes it relates to tax and tax base as well. So how much are they contributing to the incremental tax income? Now, all of that becomes really tricky. I'm going to go on a slight tangent, which is another difference between a certified chapter and an uncertified chapter is the ability of a certified chapter to kind of create its own tax base, like Tuba City has there. So there are portions of Tuba City that the business activity generates money for local government operations. Wouldn't that be great if all of our chapters had that ability? And in fact, we are kind of looking at one of the projects we'll talk about next Monday is a project to increase the capacity of all of the Navajo Thought chapters. You'll hear more about that next week. So great question. Other questions or comments?
I have another question.
Yes.
So do you have a partnership with RBDO in these economic filings that you'll be doing, these grants? Or is that up to each individual chapter?
I'm going to have you phrase that again. I didn't quite get it.
Okay, so when you talk about economic development on the Navajo Nation, you more or less likely have to have RBDO involved in some form of another, such as, you know, business leasing or, well, primarily business leasing. And so do you have a partnership with RBDO so that those filings of, like we were saying, jobs created, that information is accessible for the chapters?
Yeah, so you know, we are communicating with Dolly Lane at the Western Regional Business Development Office. Maybe not as well as we should be or as I should be. Sometimes I realize I should be including her on more communication. But yeah, the answer is yes. What we're really hoping is that the Navajo Thaw provides the funding and support for many of that office's priorities. One priority very close to the Tuba City chapter is the Curly Valley Industrial Park. And we very much would like to see that area near Van's Trading Post develop for business purposes there. So working with Dolly to help get the infrastructure to that site and business activity there. Another one's at Kaibito with the commercial development project. And others as well. They've got some projects at Bloodaway Gap, like the 100-acre site, all of those are profiled in the regional plan at NavajoThaw.com.
Sure.
Yeah, good question.
All right, never mind. All right, continue, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. Other questions or comments? Or we've had a couple of people just join us here. Anybody want to introduce themselves? Elsie, is that like Elsie as in Small Canyon? I see an Elsie and a Wynette. I think we've got more Shanto people just kind of joining our party here, which is great. Okay, well, I'll move on. Next slide. Okay, I am going to move on to slide number 14. I'm going to talk philosophy just for a little bit here. I came up with a thought about early in my career, like 2 or 3 years into the career. I saw a lot of people that knew about a grant program, so they'd try to come up with an idea so they could go get the grant. And that almost always fails. Oh, there's a grant program that will fund improved community facilities. So I'm going to go invent a community facilities project. And the way to think about it is that money chases good ideas. So the first thing is the idea has to come first. The money always follows. Sometimes it takes a long time, especially at Navajo. And I say that lovingly. I think everybody knows that. But the most important thing in the process early on is to really focus your time and energy on a project or a concept that is really needed there. Everybody knows that we need a new industrial park to serve the Navajo Thaw region. I mean, if we're going to get $4 billion and we're going to improve that many homes and we're going to have that much infrastructure activity, we better have an industrial park that is built out so that we can actually have job creation at Navajo rather than everything happening at Flagstaff or Page or that type of thing. So that would be a good idea. That kind of idea, if it's continually pushed there and refined and you get people on board, the money will follow. And I've seen that for 33 years without exception. Sometimes it takes years for it to follow, but it will. So it's not the other way around. So that's the entirety of that slide, is just don't chase the money just because you can see all of the eligible uses of funds. Rather, have a good idea and then find a funding source that ties into what you're trying to do. Simple point there, but profound, really. See too often the other way around. Next, the context for the proposal. It needs to be a part of a local plan. Well, the Navajo Thought chapters have a huge advantage over every other chapter at Navajo. Why? Because you've got a local plan. That's what the Navajo Thaw did, is that we have these chapter recovery plans for every one of the Bennett Freeze or the Navajo Thaw region chapters. And then we want to demonstrate that there is local commitment there. And that's what we do in the planning process. So for certain chapters, and it's kind of amazing to me, the chapter that showed the most local commitment in the chapter planning process in late 2019 was Botaway Gap. And Dorothy, I'm really pleased to share that with you. I think that's a big credit to Tom, and Tom kind of living there. He put his heart into that plan. But we had 48 people that attended the planning sessions over those 2 days in December of 2019. So we list them all off. And so that's, as we're making the case to Congress right now, one of the first slides that we share is that we have had over 600 people participate in this planning process. That's local commitment. So if anybody here is trying to get a project done and that project is not in your local plan, we need to talk. Because otherwise the funder is going to say, well, I thought that all your priorities were in your plan, and now you're trying to build a daycare center and your plan doesn't mention anything about a daycare center. Is it really a plan, or is this just your idea? So make sure that what you're doing is a part of the plan. Our commitment with Navajo Thaw and this long-term contract is that if you really have a great project and it's not in your plan, call us, we'll add it, basically. These plans are flexible that way. Next slide, unless there's comments or questions. So the rest of this presentation, back many years ago, I actually taught grant writing at the university level. And so I pulled out my old slides and updated them a little bit. And back then I said, you know, there's really four things we need to talk about right now. One, getting organized. Two, the motivation, understanding the motivation of the funders. Three, this concept of threshold or competitive criteria. Four, the 7 keys to successful grant writing. And then we'll finish it off with an open conversation. So that's the agenda for the rest of our day. I guess in this Zoom world, we don't take breaks. So if you need to take a break, go do it. I think I'm good. I'm going to keep on going. So next, getting organized. All right. When I'm talking about getting organized, I'm talking about who is the organization that's going to get the grant. And is it a chapter? Is it the Navajo Nation? Is it a division of the Navajo Nation? Is it a nonprofit? Is it an individual? Is it the club committee? And there are certain entities that are eligible for these grants, and there are certain ones that are not. And so what we're talking about is having your house in order. What do we mean by that? So the first thing is, for most of these grants, you either have to be a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, or you have to be a governmental unit. And if you're not either one of those, you're probably stuck unless you can get one of those two to sponsor you. So that's the eligible sponsor. So let's talk about all three of these. So 501c3 corporations are nonprofit organizations that are set up basically to advance a public cause, the public good. So all of these nonprofits have to have some public or charitable purpose. If they don't, they're not going to be certified or recognized by the IRS. And if they're not recognized by the IRS, then these funding sources are not going to award funds unless they're a governmental unit there. And so it's really, 501c3 corporations are very, very valuable. So in Western Navajo, we have, for example, the Talani Lake Enterprises. And I like to use the phrase that Talani Lake Enterprises is like solid gold there. They had Bill Edwards and others had the foresight to do the paperwork and establish that entity. And Talani Lake Enterprises, you know, it's kind of based at Talani Lake, kind of based in Winslow, and they're primarily focused upon water and food and agricultural projects. They can do other things as well. In fact, they did sponsor a planning project for Cameron here a couple of months ago, but that's an example of a 501c3. Another example here, as we have Andy, we have Zoe representing Choice Humanitarian, a 501c3 nonprofit. There are other classifications of 501s. There's 501c4s, there's 501c6s. Most chambers of commerce are a 501c6. Some of them are membership organizations, and all of that gets a little bit confusing. But what you're going to want to know if you're applying through a nonprofit is, do they have that 501c3 tax determination letter from the IRS? And if they do, and they're in good standing, they've stayed current with all their certifications, then they're a good partner for you. So that's the 501c3. Equally significant are governmental units. And earlier I talked about chapters, for example. Chapters are the local governance unit for Navajo. And there's 110 of those chapters. But only about, what, a third of them or a little bit more are certified. And even of those that are certified, some of them still are really not in a competitive position because of a lack of an audit or some problems in the past to be applicants. So most chapters are going to have a tough time applying. They still can. Shanto certainly can, I believe. Tuba City certainly can. Others that are certified, maybe, and those that are not, probably not. Cities, counties. I mean, you could approach Coconino County, for example, to sponsor a project because they're an eligible applicant. And so that's where you'd go to find an eligible sponsor. So questions about who's eligible to apply? Next is for these particular federal grant programs, there's a couple of additional requirements. If you are a 501c3 or a governmental unit, you also have to have a DUNS number, a Dun and Bradstreet number. You can click on that link and you can go file for your DUNS number. The DUNS number is going to require that you are an entity, that you have an employer identification number, an EIN, and all of this kind of gets, if you don't know about an EIN and you don't know about a DUNS number, and you've only got a few weeks left before a grant application, you're in trouble. But if you've got a month or two and you're trying to sort all that out, it's still doable that you could acquire your DUNS number. And then with that, you're going to have your system for award management. You see that SAM registration, System for Award Management. And once you have that there, you're going to have a CAGE code, C-A-G-E code, and an expiration date. And so for all of these applications, you've got to know that information, and it's got to go in with your application. I put in some applications where some of that was in process, and we got it, but we were lucky, and they're probably not going to do that again, is the news from USDA Rural Development. So this is technical, boring stuff, and all I would say is if you're listening to this, I mean, I would hope that, for example, that Choice Humanitarian is current with its DUNS number, its SAM registration, and with its grants.gov credentials to upload. And if you're not sure of that, you'll want to make sure of that. And we've got time to do that. So I could go into a whole lot of minutia. I could click on these links we could fiddle around on the system, but I don't think that's a good use of time. The main thing I want to convey is this is a requirement that you, especially for federal programs, have to cover. Questions, comments on that? Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, so what else is there about being an organized organization? How can you demonstrate capacity? Well, the first thing is a demonstrated track record. That just makes sense. If you're going to go hire somebody for a job, you're going to want to look at their resume. So if you're going to give an organization a grant, you're going to want to know, have they done this before or anything like this? Have they received grant monies and have they dispersed them? Were they good on their reports? Did they do their monthly and quarterly reports? Was there success? How did the people feel about that? And so that's a demonstrated track record there. Second is financials. The federal agency is going to want to see the last 2 or 3 years of chapter financials. I was talking to a former chapter president last year, and she said, you know, we're a certified chapter, but we're not going to apply for a grant because if anybody looked at our financials, they're just not in order. And so she didn't have the solid financials. I really respected her for being honest about that. And so it's, you know, it's really critical that all of the chapters are on top of their game. And that's not easy, especially with COVID, especially for uncertified chapters. There's so much pressure and burden put on a chapter manager or a community service coordinator, but those financials are important. Next is managerial competence. So, for example, I was on the phone yesterday with, or Friday with Tuba City Regional Healthcare Corporation, and they've got managerial competence. They've got a team of professionals. They're receiving grants. They're distributing grants. They've got resumes. They've got a track record. They've got chief financial officers, but they're a huge organization also. Can a chapter have managerial competence? Yes, it can. But that kind of ties into the demonstrated track record also. And then finally, you don't necessarily have to have a positive reputation, but you can't have a bad one. So if a funder is kind of doing a little due diligence and find out that, oh my gosh, this is a chapter that has just had a history of problems, that's going to be tough to overcome. So you want to be at least neutral. There's certainly a chapter can have problems way in the past and overcome that in a period of years there, but that just has to do with long-term reputation as an organization. Questions, comments? So we're talking about nonprofits, we're talking about governmental entities, or we're talking about going to somebody to sponsor that. So next then is getting organized related to the project. So what do we need to know about the project? Well, first of all, you've got to be able to explain the project well. So if your project is a construction project and you don't have all of that planning done, maybe you didn't start with a planning grant that really kind of scoped out, where is this? What are the environmental restrictions? How many square feet? How many jobs? You know, if you haven't figured all of those specifics out where you can really define the benefits of the project, that's going to be tough. So the project, you really just clearly need to say, we know that these can be the benefits of what we're going to be doing. And then a budget, a specific project budget. So typically the funder is going to want to see something that looks like a sources and uses of funds. Where are you getting the money from? Where is it going? And on the where are you getting the money from? Is it all our money? Or is it our money and somebody else's matching funds? And I don't know if I have a slide on matching funds, so I'm going to talk about that now. So many of these grant programs will say, we require a financial match, meaning where's your money? What skin are you putting into the game? And then that match, sometimes they will say it's required to be cash match. And sometimes they'll say it can be in kind, in-hyphen-kind, a weird phrase, but in kind match means that even if you don't have cash, maybe there's another way where you can demonstrate commitment to the project. Maybe, so cash is easy. Cash is what it is. It's money in the bank. And you're saying, if you give us that $100,000 grant, our $50,000 cash is here. It's committed. It's firm. It's in the bank. And when the project starts, we can write a check or we can transfer it into this particular fund. So that's a cash match, very self-explanatory. About half the programs, maybe a little less, require the cash. And then some of them will allow in kind. And so in kind typically is the value of something that you're contributing to a project that's not cash. So in kind match can be, okay, this project's going to go on for 12 months. And we are going to hold meetings at the chapter house, which probably during a pandemic we can't, but in normal times. We believe that the value of that space is $200 an hour, and we're going to have 36 hours of meetings over 12 months. So 36 times 200 is $200. So you put that in as an in-kind match. And as long as it passes the sniff test, there's no real firm mathematics or guide to this, but you just need to be honest, or you might say, our chapter manager, who we pay X amount per year and Y amount per month, is going to work on this project. And you know what? That's valuable. And they're going to put in 3 hours a month into this project, and they're worth X amount per hour. Therefore, that's our in-kind match. And there's a number of ways to come across in-kind match. So you're going to need to develop in your grant application a budget that has the sources and uses of funds. And then on the uses side, if it's planning, the uses might be, here's the consultant doing the work, or here's the community member that has the credentials to do the work. And so you would list off where all of those funds are going to be spent. Sometimes the funder is going to want to know if the project is 12 months or 24 months, what is your plan to expend those funds on a per month basis? And I think that's a good way to go about it typically, because it kind of sets an expectation of what you're going to accomplish in every month and how much funding might go out, how much matching funds, cash or in kind, are needed, that type of thing. So that's the project budget related to either a planning project or a construction budget, or maybe if you can figure out a way to fund it in operations. Next, measurable results. So you need to be very specific. What are we going to accomplish in terms of the results? And you can think of results as activities, but that's not really results. That's just action to get to the results. You can think of them as deliverables, which is actually maybe a document, but the results are more like what Nelson was asking earlier. How many jobs are we creating? How much tax income will result from that? How, what is the total income by these people? Or how many miles of power line are we going to extend? Or how many homes are going to have running water to them? Something along those lines. Very measurable. There's an acronym called SMART, S-M-A-R-T, which is one way to think about how accurate are we being very specific. Is it measurable? Is it achievable? Can we really measure it in terms of time? That was the T, and the R is it realistic there? And so you might want to think about that acronym. You might just Google that. I went through that rather fast, but SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic. Yeah, and time bound. What's the time frame on that? So that's measurability of results. And then finally, sustainability. I spoke of this earlier. The last thing that a funder wants is to drive by, come on out to Tonalea, go out to Shanto. We funded the new senior center and it's boarded up. It needs to be sustainable, and you need to be able to explain how it's going to be sustainable. Sometimes that requires a business plan, or at least, you know, financial projections with the assumptions spelled out. So I'm hoping there's a question or two because I'm getting tired of talking. Questions? Okay, you're gonna make me dizzy if there's no questions.
Wait, I thought of a question.
Oh, good, thank you.
Is there, you might go over this later, is there a specific format that grants should include all this information, whether it's like a Excel document or like a Google Doc, or like a spreadsheet, somehow that this can all be easily presented in a very like readable way?
Yeah, needed to make that question longer, but yeah. For the grants I'm thinking about with these 4 federal grant programs, they ultimately will be turned in, and there'll be 2 types of documents that you'll submit. Some of them are just the federal forms that need to be filled out, and the other ones are Word Word documents that have been turned into a PDF. And I suppose you could embed an Excel document into the Word document and PDF it, or you could have an Excel document itself that you PDF and submit. Yeah, ultimately, as I think about it, there's going to be 2 types of documents. These federal grant programs are going to require anywhere from 4 to maybe 10 federal forms, and then kind of your narrative and budget, which is going to be typically generated as a Word doc or an Apple doc that you would PDF and submit. Speaking for a second, because I don't have anything in this presentation about the federal forms, and I don't have them, I should have them on the screen here, but I can do that. There is an SF 424 form, which is a 2 or 3 page general kind of cover page for each of these programs. And they do come with instructions. They're pretty easy, I think, to complete in terms of the 424. There's also a 424A form, which is going to have you go into how much money are you asking for and how much matching funds and when do you need it. So that's going to be on the 424A form. And then depending on whether or not you have a construction program or not, there'll be programs that are specific for construction or not. And if you do go for the construction route for some of these projects, like the call I had with the Vendors Association there at Botaway just last week, I was suggesting that you guys might be ready to build something. I think they actually don't think they are, which is fine. If that's the case, then there'll be more forms related to a construction project. Construction is a step up, both in terms of the rigor of applying as well as to actually demonstrate performance on. That answer the question, Zoe?
Yeah, that did answer my question. Thank you. Sorry, it was long.
Yeah. Other questions about defining a project?
I have a question.
Yes.
I think you went over it before I came on, but you were kind of skimmed over it right when I came on. But I have a question. We're looking at a project in Shanto area that involves a historical site. And there's two places and both of them involve demo projects. For such projects like this, that be part of a startup, a plan, or grant requesting for grant money?
Yes. So if I understand the question right, you've got a project related to a historic building. You know, and as you probably know, that brings a whole new set of complexities to a project and the need to probably coordinate with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, which I bet you already know about. Is that true?
Yes, we are in the process of, well, Elsie is the one that's getting the documents all lined up with the Navajo Nation, the Historical Preservation Office. Yeah, we're doing a ethnographic study right now.
Wow. Good for you. Yeah. So, I mean, it does bring an additional level of complexity to a grant. And once you get the funding to actually do stuff because of all of the kind of extra layer of concerns about preserving our history. I can go into all those details, but yeah, so, but the answer is yes. And in fact, there is another program that UNLC may want to look into. I haven't looked at this in a long time, but there are federal grant programs coordinated by the National Main Street Center. National Main Street Center, you're going to want to look that up. On their website, they will have programs like the National Historic Preservation Loan Program. I haven't thought of that in a decade, but and that is a loan. Grants are better than loans, obviously, but sometimes loans can work. So there may be some doors that are open that are good because you have historic preservation. A lot of it's bad because it's just harder because of all the requirements. You know, if you're looking at doing a planning grant for a historic preservation project, I think that's pretty straightforward. If you're looking at doing construction on a historic preservation project like we are in Coppermine, that gets a little bit trickier. So.
Okay. And you also touched on tourism. The other site that we're looking at is a potential site for an RV park along 160. And it's an old site with buildings that are still there. So would the demo part of that area be part of a grant planning?
Is that a site that I'm familiar? I'm familiar with a site there that used to have an old motel on it. Is that Shanto or is that further to the east?
Motel, is that Sayik? Is that closer to Kayenta? The one with that's part of Kayenta.
Okay, yeah.
One right before the one by the silo with the conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. When you say tourism, so a couple of things is, I mean, there is a great case to be made for tourism at Navajo. Yes, the pandemic basically has annihilated tourism. Yeah, I mean, it's the industry throughout the world that's the most hard hit as a result of the pandemic, and that's understandable. But I think that tourism at Navajo is a profound opportunity. A couple of things. One is I happen to have authored the Navajo Tourism Strategic Plan, Arlene. If you don't have a copy of that, send me an email and I'll send it to you. bc@buildingcommunities.us. And I think Elsie's got my email address, but if you don't have that, I'd love to send you that. I'd also direct you to the Arizona Office of Tourism website, Arizona Office of Tourism. They have a lot of always current tourism data there, which those numbers are not good right now, but they also have a recovery plan posted on their website on how the state of Arizona is going to recover from COVID there. And then, you know, I also authored the feasibility study for Lionel Big Thumb and his family at Lachii related to some of the tours there. And so I'm really familiar with the opportunity that Navajo has for tourism. I think it's just gigantic. But what people want, like I said, on those vending facilities is that we're kind of accustomed to seeing things that look right and feel safe to us. And so building the right RV parks that look right, feel safe, especially on 160. Plus you have access online that you might already know, but the Arizona ADOT posts on a website the average daily traffic count at many locations on state highways all over the place. So you should be able to access that also.
Okay, they have the current traffic count daily?
Yeah, I think they do. Somewhere I've got that website, but I think if you just do a search for ADOT, Arizona Department of Transportation, average daily traffic count, there is a gigantic spreadsheet out there somewhere. So you should track that down. If you can't find it, send me an email. I'll see if I can do a little digging for you.
Okay, and I just want to reconfirm also, I think you also shared the information. I just wanted to confirm it. You were saying about the engineering architect plans can be part of grant writing, like if we set a site up for development, but we're looking at preparing the grounds and have an architect plan prepared for it. That can be part of a grant writing?
Yes, it can. Yes. One of the questions I'll ask you is on a project like that, is that for a for-profit business there, or is this for something that the chapter would own and operate?
It's our board, Economic Development Board, is a for-profit business. It's a for-profit board, yeah.
I mean, so typically for-profit businesses can't get grants. I'll say that again because that's generally the case. So a for-profit, like building communities, I'm a for-profit company. There are exceptions to that, especially with COVID and the payroll protection program and some other things. But in general, if you're looking for public resources, they're going to want to invest into public investments there, a public, so you can get the grant money to extend the water and the power and develop the sewer system that makes the for-profit business enterprise, it can pencil better because you're not spending all of their money or yours on the infrastructure, but actually putting the money into a for-profit can be tricky.
This is Raquel. I have a comment on that as well.
Yeah, Raquel.
Hi. I forgot to mention too at the beginning that Shanto Community Governance chapter actually owns Shanto Economic Development Corporation. So with that situation, would the chapter be able to apply for all those nonprofit grants since they're the government entity? Because they would be the one responsible for getting the ground set up. SEDC would be, such as like the RV park, for instance, SEDC would just own the lease and lease from Shanto Community Governance.
Yeah, I think in that case, I think if it's Shanto Community Governance that is the applicant, and that is basically the chapter, the public entity, then yes, I think you could apply. And that's just a matter of, so I don't know that I have this on any slide, but when you actually get into the application process, do not be bashful about calling the federal agency or the state agency or the Navajo division or department or the nonprofit, program manager. Just ask them. Especially, I mean, Navajo's an underdog in a lot of things. And so if you call people and they're going to start rooting for you there. So I would just, call the program manager and say, okay, we're Shanto Community Governance. We think we're the applicant here, and just talk it through with them. Whatever you do, don't put a lot of time into writing a grant if you're not sure you're eligible there.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you.
thank you for that information, Brian.
Hey, you bet. Oh, my pleasure. Yeah. Yeah, Shanto is a star, a superstar at Navajo. And so you guys need to keep on going. All right, I'm gonna, okay, so next is, you'd think that if you were taking a grant writing class, you might spend a little bit of time talking about writing skills. And I don't go there. When I taught this at a university level, I figured that, you know what? I am going to make the assumption that you know how to write. And I'm actually consider myself a pretty lousy teacher. I hope I'm doing okay instructing this right now. But the assumption I'm making in all of this is that if you don't have good writing skills, at least average, you're going to go find a friend that does there. And you're going to talk them into writing it for you, or you're going to write it and they're going to edit it. If you have really sloppy writing that's so much to the point to where somebody's reading it, and even if they're rooting for you, yes, I really want to see these guys get this, you can disqualify yourself if the writing is just poor. Now, if you think you have average writing skills, I'm going to guess you're actually better than you think you are. I think a lot of people, very few people would say, oh yeah, I'm a writer. And in fact, I don't know that I thought I was that much of a great writer. But I know that I can make a case there. I know that I can string together consistent arguments in the English language. And unfortunately, if you write it in Navajo, these federal agencies, they're probably not going to figure it out. So it's going to have to be in English, and it just needs to be clear and concise and error-free there. And fortunately, with word processing programs like Microsoft Word or Apple or whatever, if you spell something wrong, it's going to flag it for you. If you've got some grammar that's not very efficient, it's probably going to tell you. So that helps. But the main thing is that put yourself in their shoes. Go find somebody that you have some confidence in, that has some writing skills, and bounce it off of them. And that's really all I say on writing skills. So I kind of give that short shrift, I guess is the phrase there, but it is important. All right, comments on writing skills. Okay, so one of the first things I said early on is that to do good grant writing, it means it's salesmanship. It's understanding with an understanding of what you're trying to tell somebody. So you want to tell them what they want to hear in order that they make the decision that you want them to make. So you kind of have to put yourself in their shoes there of, what is it that they know? So, if you're writing to a Navajo division, you can probably assume that they know where your chapter is, and they may have some idea of whether you're certified, and they may have some idea of a track record of how things are going. If, on the other hand, you're writing a grant to the Arizona Commerce Authority, or you're writing a grant to a foundation based in Phoenix or New York or Albuquerque, they're not going to know where you are. They're not going to know much about Navajo. And so you really have an opportunity to help them think about you. You really have a unique opportunity to put the first impression in their mind. And that's where I think a lot of almost every grant that I've written for a Navajo project in the last 4 years has been funded. I start with the notion that they don't know anything about Navajo unless they've provided grants before. And then I also start with the assumption that they're rooting for us. And that's really true. And then I want to reinforce those assumptions If I think that they're rooting for us, I want them to really root for us there. And so there's a number of things that can be done that really builds from the heart there. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'm going to go to the next slide. So there are, in general, 3 types of funders. And mainly on this list of these 3 bullets, the only one that I'm really thinking about is the second one, the government agencies. That's where these federal programs obviously fit. But there are entities beyond government agencies. There are foundations that fund projects in Arizona. I'm gonna make myself a note. And I was going to do more homework than I did. I've done this in the past. I need to go back and do it, and I'll bring some answers to the next session, which is, what are the foundations in Arizona that could fund Navajo? You know, what are the government agencies that could fund Navajo? And then what are the corporate foundations? Those are the 3 types of funders out there. So we're mainly going to focus on the government agencies. And I think the government agencies are pretty straightforward. You can read their guidelines and they will explain who is eligible and what they're trying to fund there. But I think that there is a huge motivation by federal agencies to help Navajo. People know that we're up against all odds. They know that in general that incomes are lower, the availability of water is less, the availability of power is less, but you need to reinforce that with these federal agencies. In fact, all 3 of these, by telling that difficult story there. What are the statistics about how many people in your community do not have water? How many miles do they have to go round trip in a pickup truck with some type of water storage system in the back just to basically feed the livestock? You know, there is, with the Navajo thaw, back about a year and a half ago, I grabbed my iPhone and I said to Thomas I said, what's the Bennett freeze mean? And if you haven't taken 4 minutes, it's on the homepage of the Navajo Thaw website, which is what is the Bennett freeze and what were the impacts of the Bennett freeze? And if you just listen to what Tom said for 4 minutes, you're going to want to help there. And it's right there. You'll see it on the homepage of NavajoThaw.com. So all of these are going to be moved by their own motivation to provide help there. The one that's a little bit different, and I have not done really much fundraising at all, and I think Shanto actually has with your Rock the Canyon event. You guys have been really good about going to the Pepsi Foundation or Coca-Cola or whatever and going to corporate foundations. So we've got general foundations, we've got corporate foundations, then we've got government agencies, and they all have kind of a slightly different motivation. But the one that's a little bit different than the other 2 are these corporate foundations. And so like the Rock the Canyon event, which I keep saying I'm going to get to one of these years, once that gets started up again, I want to go to that. And if I'm a corporate foundation like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or Verizon or something, I'm going to want to basically provide something that's raising the positive image and profile of my corporation there. And so that's the motivation of corporate foundations as compared to most general foundations. They're not looking for a lot of accolades. They're just wanting to get the money out for projects that are consistent with their mission, which is typically described on their website. So I covered a lot there, and I was a little bit cryptic about that. So questions about these 3 different types of funders and their motivation? All right, then I'm going to shift to another kind of concept here, which is if you are writing a grant, ultimately there's probably going to be some scoring system that the grant will be scored on, usually at a scale of 0 to 100. And that will be based on what is typically referred to as competitive criteria. So how well do you compete based upon competitive criteria as compared to threshold criteria? So I just want to take a minute or two and get you thinking about, what are you talking about, Cole? What's a threshold criteria and what's a competitive criteria? So a threshold criteria is basically just having the eligibility to apply in the first place. A threshold criteria would be, are you eligible to apply? Are you a governmental entity or a 501c3 nonprofit? And if not, you have not met our threshold. You're just an individual that basically wants to go to college or improve your home, and you're asking us for $5,000. That is not meeting our threshold, because the threshold criteria would say you got to be a nonprofit, or you got to be a governmental entity, or you've got to have a project that's consistent with our eligible projects there. Those are threshold criteria. And so those are not scored. That just is whether or not the entity is even going to read your application. Sometimes a threshold is going to be, we told you that there was only 10 pages in which you could submit an application, and you sent one in for 15, you missed the threshold, you're out. Or we're only going to read the first 10 pages, which probably means you're out at that point. So that would be a threshold criteria, as compared to a competitive criteria, which might be, how many jobs are you creating? Or how much money are you asking for divided by how many people are in your chapter? Or how, in 200 words, how are you going to maintain this improvement once it's completed? Those are competitive criteria. And typically a grant application is going to say it's going to be 30 points based on your organization, 20 points based on the worthiness of your project, 20 points based on your description of sustainability, 10 points are, whatever. I mean, they're going to spell it out on how many points. And so those are the competitive criteria. And a lot of times, and some of these rural development grant programs with the federal agency, they actually give you the score sheet. When I submit an RBDG grant to USDA Rural Development, they'll say, if you want, you can score your own grant. And boy, I look at that and go, you bet I will, because I'm going to try to make the case that in any area where there might be a little bit of wiggle room, I'm going to paint it towards the highest number of points there. Very unique by USDA Rural Development. I really like that about their grant programs, is that you can kind of go through there and you can score it yourself. And you know what, if you're not scoring 70 out of 100, you probably aren't going to get the grant. Don't waste the time there. So you can start with their score sheet on that. That's very unique about that grant program. I haven't seen that very often. So questions about threshold or competitive criteria? Okay. Next, 7 Keys to Success by Brian Cole. These are my keys. I think if you ask some other grant writer, they'd probably have 7 different ones, but these are the best ones, so let's do these. First one is, and it's what I said earlier, I still mean this, which is that money always follows good ideas. If you've got a really good idea, and you can really lay it out, you'll get funded eventually. That's just my belief. You may not get the grant the first year, and your attitude ought to be, I think I've still got a good idea, but maybe I better go back. One thing you can do, by the way, is sometimes these programs will send you their score sheets. or they'll send you the reviewer's comments there. Personally, I have pretty thin skin. I don't like reviewing reviewers' comments when I don't get a grant. I love reading them when I do, but you probably have thicker skin. And so you can always ask, hey, I didn't get that. Would you just send me the rationale? And then the next year, and most of these programs have a 1-year cycle, some more frequently than that, you can address your weaknesses there. But I spoke to this one earlier, so I'm going to move on. Number 2, I think of grant writing as having 3 ingredients. The project or program or service, your writing skills, and then the thing that I haven't spoke to very much are the relationships. And that's one thing I'm doing with this grant writing series is that next week, I'm inviting USDA Rural Development to sit in on this. I'm inviting them to describe their programs. I'm inviting you to meet them. And you're going to start building a relationship. So Choice Humanitarian or Shanto or Tuba City, and I think they're going to show up next week. You can have a sidebar conversation. You could send them an email going, here's a sketch of what, we're thinking of doing with this historic site. What do you think? And they're rooting for you. So in general, do not think of these funders as someone that's behind the curtain that you'll never get to know. If we can get them out to Navajo, and we've done that. They've been out for the Navajo Thaw Summit a year ago today. In fact, we had the summit. And so we have developed good relationships. In fact, our friend Clint with USDA Rural Development, and a lot of our grants have been done by him. He sent me an email 10 days ago. Said, Brian, I'm on a webinar with the brand new Undersecretary for Rural Development. He is the Undersecretary to the Secretary of Agriculture. And he said, when he learns about the Navajo Thaw, he's going to love it because I'm learning about this guy. He's the Undersecretary. He's from Kentucky. And what he's talking about is if only there was a big regional approach to solve big problems. Well, guess what? That's us. And so by virtue of the fact that all of you are a part, or neighbors anyway, to the thaw, is going to do nothing but help you. So those are the relationships there. Cultivate them, reach out. If you've got, what we're doing with the Navajo Thaw, and I've done this more than any time in my 33-year career, is we have an 800-member email list. And we're sending emails to the Undersecretary of Agriculture right now for Rural Development, talking about the Navajo Thaw. We're building that relationship there. So that's number 2. Have a good project, program, or service, have decent writing, and then work the relationships. Questions, comments there? Next, ask the right funding sources. One thing I promised I was going to do, and I've done a really lousy job of it, is listing off other funding sources. So this is the second time I've written that down. I've got a file of about 40 federal funding programs that come up on an annual basis. And I'm going to post all of that information on the NavajoThaw.com website. It's just going to be kind of like a grant center there. And so look for that. And once I do send that out, I'll send an email to all of you saying it's there. But the main thing I'm really focused on are these 3 or 4 federal grant programs with rural development that have deadlines coming up right now. I want to see how many grants we can get in for everybody. The point of number 3 here is make sure you ask the right program for the right project. Make sure that there is a fit between your mission and theirs. So if your mission is, I'm going to do something about these particular historic buildings, then let's find an entity that likes to support historic buildings. Or if they're into job creation, let's go after that. If they're into capacity building or certification, find those mission connections and ask them for what they want to fund. Number 4, request the right amount. If you ask for too much money, they're probably going to say no. Sometimes they will say, well, we have evaluated your grant. You asked for $30,000. Would you take 10,000? And then you got to look at it and go, well, what would I do with 10,000? Could I still get a third of it done, or could I match it, et cetera? But most of the time, if you're way out of the league, it kind of shows you didn't do your homework. So how do you know how much to ask for? Well, first of all, in the program guidelines, typically they will say, so they're going to say, hey, the minimum grant award might be $5,000 and the maximum is going to be $100,000. Well, don't ask for $150,000 if the maximum is $100,000. When we applied for the Envision Cameron project and got it, it was a Talani Lake Enterprises was the grant because the chapter couldn't be. And we applied for $250,000, and the federal government said, well, we can't do $250,000, but we can do $215,000. Would you take that? That took about 3 seconds to say, yep, we can do that, and we made a couple of cuts and we're off to the races with that grant. But most of the time, if you ask for more than what they're going to allow for, it's typically all or nothing. By the same virtue, you don't want to ask for too little. It's going to show them that you're not very knowledgeable. So if they have a range of 10,000 to 100,000 and you ask for 5,000, it kind of shows that you didn't do your homework there. So typically they're going to give you a range. Not always, but they typically are. For some grant programs, you can say, well, who did you fund last year? Can you give me a listing of last year or the year before? Take a look at it. Oh, okay, well, they got 100,000 for something similar. Maybe we can. And sometimes you can just do a Google search. It says, name of grant program, 2019 funding recipients. Boom, there it is. And so that'll give you an idea also about how much. So ask for the right amount of money. Next. Okay. This next one is kind of my favorite personal message. I think it's kind of unique in terms of what would be taught in a grant writing course. I like to think that you need to be the master of both logic and emotion. I remember back in 2010, there was a brand new grant program with a pretty much brand new United States president. His name was Barack Obama, and he put together this huge federal regional planning grant program at the same time that I was just starting building communities. And I went big on that. There was actually it was in 2011. I had just gotten a successful grant for Apache County, and that's what got me started in Arizona and with Navajo. And then the next year, the same program with only more money came along. And I read you have 20 pages, and here's the first question. Describe your organization. Boy, that's boring. Describe your project. That's kind of boring. And so I took the liberty on all 3 of those grant applications to create my own first question, because I felt like I needed to hook these guys first there. And I felt like their questions, and you got to be careful about doing this. Usually if there's a grant form, it says, here's the 10 questions, you better answer those 10 questions. What I did is I created an 11th question, which was kind of like, why should you care? And I spent the first page and I just kind of hooked them with emotion because I was hooked with emotion. When I was thinking about the impacts of the Bennett freeze to Navajo, or when I was thinking about the impacts of the oil boom in North Dakota, Or when I was thinking about poverty in the Arkansas Delta, I wanted to basically get somebody that knew nothing about the Arkansas Delta or the North Dakota oil boom or the Navajo Bennett freeze. I wanted to lead with that. It was like, you know, any good, you know, magazine article is going to hook you with the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, and you're going to want to read the whole thing. So the reason why I bring this up is that when you're doing a grant, you've got to put yourself in the reader's shoes. You've got to realize that they're probably reading 50 of these, and they're only going to fund 5 or 10. So actually, a better example than the North Dakota oil fields was the grant that we wrote for Cameron. And this was done back in September. And we were writing a grant on placemaking. And so placemaking grant, they defined the federal agency, which again was rural development. They said placemaking is creating a place where you want to live, where you want to work, where you want to play. And I thought, okay, so we're writing a placemaking grant about Cameron. What's unique about Cameron? Especially what's unique about Cameron if I'm reading this grant application and I'm a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., or even Phoenix, and I thought, you know, what's unique about Cameron is, and placemaking, and I thought, I wonder what Cameron looks like if I get out Google Earth. So I got Google Earth and I type in Cameron and boom, it's just what I hoped. It's this brown desert that looks like Mars right next to the deepest canyon in the world. And that was the image. So what did I do? I took a screenshot of basically Google Earth from Cameron from 8 miles above planet Earth. And then the storyline was, you know, what does Cameron need to look like in 2050 or 2070? How can we capitalize upon the proximity to the Grand Canyon? Because we've got all these tourists coming through. They're speaking all of these languages, and the only thing they're doing is getting a Whopper at Burger King, you know? And with that imagery and that storyline in the first 2 paragraphs, you're hooked. It's like, I got to read the rest of this. That really is different than every other grant that I'm writing. So grant writing is storytelling where you master emotion. What is it that they need to think about that makes you unique? So, you know, if I'm in Shanto and I want to do an RV park, I'm going to want to know, you know, how many people are driving from the Grand Canyon to Monument Valley? And why aren't they stopping at Shanto? There's some pretty cool things. We even have a national monument here. So how can I tell a story that really captures the reader? You know, we have low per capita income. We just had the closure of the coal mine. I mean, just the coal mine story itself and the loss of those jobs. The fact that Navajo has lost 20% of the entire nation's budget gone as a result of the closure of the coal mine. What about the coronavirus? You know, there was a time, sadly, despite what I think are great job by this administration in addressing the pandemic, where the worst numbers in the world were at Navajo in terms of the number of people that had COVID. It's a sad story, but it'll grab you emotionally there. So we tell those stories, and the reader is kind of going, I've got to find a way to fund this. I sure hope that they haven't screwed this up. I hope they have their cage code. I hope they have their SAM registration. I hope that they didn't write, you know, they're within the page constraint, because I want to get to yes. And you want them thinking that before they get 1/4 of the way through the narrative on this. So that's the mastering the emotion. And then the logic is you still have to have statistics. And there's something crazy at Navajo going on, and I've seen it for 7 years, which is data. The numbers are so hard to come by. It's so frustrating for me because every time anybody does research at Navajo, they think it's theirs. This is public information. So what we say with the Navajo Thaw is unless we've signed an NDA, a non-disclosure, everything we've ever produced, anything that we've ever written is yours. It's public. So earlier when I said that, Building Communities is the author of the Navajo Tourism Strategic Plan, we want to give it to you and we want you to be able to use it. But what I have seen at Navajo, it perplexes me so much is that, well, I'm a member of the club and I did this research, so it's mine. And I'm not going to let you use it. And shame on you, Building Communities or native builders, for thinking you can use my data. And I'm going, with an attitude like that, we're never going to get a grant because all of the good research is just being held up. It's being possessed there. It needs to be used. There are exceptions, and I respect that. But in general, our philosophy is that if we've produced it, it's paid for by public money, the Navajo Nation or rural development, and it's public, it's yours. Number 6, timing. As they say, timing is everything. First of all, timing relates to if there's a grant application deadline, don't miss it, period. And so if you don't have your DUNS number, if you don't have your SAM registration code, if you don't have your budget, if you don't have your audit, if you don't have all of this in order, then you better wait till next year. So that's the purpose of a deadline. And especially with the federal, almost everybody, a deadline is a deadline there. So you can be 10 minutes late to a Zoom meeting, but you can't be 10 minutes late for a grant application, okay? So that's part of the timing. But the other part of the timing is we've created our own timing with the Navajo Thaw right now. I think any grant that says, hey, we're a part of this regional effort, this is a good time for you to be applying. Shanto's not in the Navajo Thaw, but I'd find a way to kind of build upon it there. You think, we're right next to it. We've got growth of the Navajo Thaw. Shanto wants to capitalize on that. And we want to lift all boats here. So timing is just important all the way around. Meet your deadlines, but also think about what these agencies want. The timing of the Navajo Thaw is incredible right now. I like to say, and this gets a little political, forgive me for this, but the timing of the 2018 election, when all the delegates got elected and the House of Representatives flipped to the Democrats, the timing of the 2020 election, when I think we have a lot of good new chapter officials that really care. And now we've got a president that really cares. I think that plays really well for Navajo. The Biden administration, the reelection of Tom O'Halloran, all plays really, really well. And even the Georgia election. Now we've got basically, and this gets political, but with Democrats controlling the presidency in both chambers, combined with the fact that the Navajo Nation is predominantly Democrat and basically helped to reelect O'Halloran and put U.S. senators in there, we're holding a strong hand, folks. And I don't mean to get too political on this, but you want to play that hand right now. So that's timing as well. And then neutralizing detractors. I wrote a grant in 2002. It was a great grant. And I had one person in the community that just didn't like me and didn't want the project to go forward. And they just sent letters to the federal agency going, you know what? You don't want to do this. Put your money somewhere else. And they did. And that can happen with what we're doing with all of these projects. And so if you know that you've got a new chapter official and they're not totally on board, but if you can share more information so they will be, do it there. If there are, if there's banter on Facebook that's negative, do what you can to go talk to them or listen to them. Go, what's the concern here? What's going on? Try to neutralize people as much as you can. And that is my last slide. So with that, I'm just going to open it up. Where I feel like I've been weak on this is I think I've made a promise to share more information about funding sources, and I'm going to work on that and make that available before next week on that. And with that, I'm going to open it up for question and answer. We've still got 13 people here. Questions or comments?
I guess if you maybe create a matrix of community projects like you have in the Navajo Thought book, and then the matrix of community development and economic development, and I guess the 4 boxes, then you could show which USDA or what grants to kind of organize, allow the chapters to organize their material. That would be a help.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen again and kind of respond to that. It's a really good suggestion, and I think we're a step ahead of you on that, I'm pleased to say. So let's see here. If I share a screen, no, I did that wrong. All right, here we go. So on the screen right now is the NavajoThaw.com website. And I'd suggest that everybody spend some time on this. If you're a grant writer saying, hey, we're here to help the Navajo Thaw. If you're a chapter official trying to advance a project, you're going to want to show that that project is in your plan. So here's the website, and we've got all the recovery plans here. I clicked on the recovery plans tab, then I clicked it on there, and so here's every one of the plans for all 9 chapters plus Nahatazil. And so if you're Tuba City, here's your plan. And then if you want a shortcut that says, hey, I'm really trying to show that this project that I'm working on is in my plan, we created a summary. And I'm really glad I'm looking at this because it's showing the Botaway Gap summary for Tuba City, which is a mistake. So I'm going to fix that. Tuba City projects Botaway. So now I'm curious what happens if I click here since I've made a mistake. So, okay, it says Tuba City. So it actually is your projects in Tuba City, every one of them. So rather than reading the 110-page plan, every project that related to every strategy is there for every chapter. It's just that I seem to have a mistake on that page. So I'll fix that. But yeah, you're definitely going to want to make the case that what we're trying to do is either in the regional plan or it's in your chapter recovery plan. Well, I've got the floor here. So this is the Navajo Thaw homepage. And this is a summary of all of our projects that are currently underway. And we've got more that are going on. We've got the grant writing workshop being promoted right there. But what I was also going to show while I'm here is each of the chapter recovery plans can be accessed on this tab right here that is going light blue, dark blue. And the overall chapter recovery plan is also worth looking at as well. Okay, other comments, questions? Okay, well, This does not have to be any longer. We don't want it to be. So we're at the going, gone stage before I give a little bit of a pitch on the next 2 weeks and what we're going to do. Let me, we got a little more time. Let me pull up one document here. Okay, if this is working, it should say potential projects on the screen. Is that what that looks like? No, maybe there. Yeah. So this is a bit of a head start. I'm going to see if I can make that screen a little bit bigger. All right. I think particularly with Choice Humanitarian and 2 grant writers, and Kristen Cooper, are you still with us here?
I am. I've
Okay.
got to head out at, I think 4:55 to take my daughter to basketball, but I'm still here for now.
Okay, get you for a few minutes here. Yeah, you're an hour ahead of everybody. Let me just take this minute. I think we're basically done. I've presented everything I wanted to today, but I want to, particularly with Kristen and A and Z here, I want to kind of whet everybody's appetite with what I'm thinking about as possible projects. But this may not be the whole list. So this top left, chapter certification and utilization of housing escrow funds. I really think this is a great project here. I'm really impressed with, earlier I said, I feel like we just won the 2020 election. And what I mean by that is we've really got some great chapter officials there. And they really want to step up their game. And so I think that helping them certify and create capacity with their chapters and spend, they've got $3.5 million for housing, is a really cool project. It would require quite a bit to pull that off with a grant application in the next 5 weeks. But when I chatted a little bit with Steve Pierce and Lonnie and Marilyn, I think this is a pretty good fit for Choice. So that's an idea there. I'm just going to kind of whet your appetite with all of these. Choice itself, the mission that Choice has is this relief, resilience, and enterprise project. I think of relief is the food mission that has already been accomplished, and there could be more of that. Resilience being making sure that the Navajo region can kind of address things like pandemics in the future, and enterprise being business development. There could be grant funding for Choice for that mission. There's a couple of projects, the Native American products, which is the second one down in the left column, and the vending facility location. That's a little bit like what we talked about with Botaway Gap and their vending organization. I think those two can be combined for new facilities or certification for products. I think that's a really cool idea that could create jobs and income. One that might actually relate to Shanto a little bit. Our friends east of us at the Navajo partitioned land, they would like a plan of their own. That doesn't really relate to us, but that's a pretty good idea. Staffing the Navajo Thaw, this Navajo Thaw is exploding, and we just need more hands on deck here. So that's that idea. The Swaback planning project, that actually relates to what is going on at Cameron and duplicating that, I think especially at Copper Mine and Coal Mine. And so there's some really good planning that's sitting on the shelf that needs to be dusted off. Telecommunications, that's needed everywhere, everything from using Zoom to actually putting fiber to the chapters, that needs to be done. There's actually some new money out there for that. Tribal leadership training, riparian restoration, and even creating some type of video chronicle of all of our progress. So those are some project ideas, but you know, there's other ideas that we could be doing as well. So I just kind of wanted to throw that on the screen. With that, anything for the good of the order? All right. Well, then we're done. We're going to do this again in 1 week, 1 o'clock on the 1st and 1 o'clock on the 8th. And the goal is to build some new grant writers and to actually get some applications done. So I hope this has been helpful, and we'll see you in a week.
Thanks so much, Brian. Appreciate
Thank
all your
you.
expertise.
Cool. All right, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brian.
My pleasure.
Good night.
Take care.
Thank you.